Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Joining us by phone, Osita Nwanevu, the contributing editor at The New Republic and columnist at The Guardian, and also the proprietor of his Ghost newsletter that is the rival to Substack, and also apparently getting very popular at Osita Nwanevu.com. We will put a link to that at majority.fm. Osita, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So the big news, obviously, in the past 24 hours is that the U.S. and U.K. have essentially bombed Houthi controlled areas of Yemen in response to what has been like a 6-week, 8-week campaign by the Houthis of essentially firing upon, and in some instances boarding and civilian ships in the Red Sea as a way of protesting the assault of the Israelis on Gaza. Give me your first thoughts on this, I guess.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, to the extent I understand it, I think it's probably best understood as another theater of Israel's offensive against Gaza. These attacks on the ships are happening because they're an effort to sort of arrest international commerce as a way of trying to pressure Israel and its backers to cease the assault on Gaza. So I think it's best understood as an extension of that story, which we've all been following, obviously, for the last several months. And, you know, I tend to think, as I've written before and we talked about before on social media, the best way to resolve this conflict is going to be a negotiated ceasefire. We're seeing a terrible, terrible offensive. I'm sure we're going to talk about what's happening at The Hague right now. But, you know, this is an extension of a horrible and, from my perspective, immoral war. And the American response to the Houthis right now, as many people have said in Congress, is being conducted without fulfilling the norm of requiring Congress's approval to engage in military action. There's this ongoing debate about whether or not, the extent to which Article 1 powers still apply. There have been so many loopholes shot into that thing over the last however many decades. It's practically Swiss cheese now. But I do tend to believe that it's important for the presidents, when they do things like this, to seek the broader approval of the public rather than kind of doing them unilaterally, especially in this case where I think more and more Americans are perturbed by what's been going on in Gaza and don't really feel that the United States should be backing a horrible and immoral war. On
the authorization front, I think in 2020 we have a Joe Biden tweet. Do we have that tweet? I put it into the Slack. Joe Biden tweeted out in response to Trump's attack on Soleimani.
Here we go. I have it here if you want me to read it. Let's be clear. This one, Donald Trump does not have the authority to take us into war with Iran without congressional approval. A president should never take this nation to war without the informed consent of the American people. He also had other statements about not getting us involved in the Middle East that he's immediately contradicting now that he's in power. So, it's quite clear that Congress should have been consulted per the
apparently
Constitution.
they were consulted, but the real question is whether they should give their consent. I mean,
yes.
And this is, what's interesting to me too about this, Osita, is that this was ostensibly a function of Operation Prosperity Guardian, and. If you're going to set up Operation Prosperity Guardian, which involved, I guess, a 20-member coalition that ostensibly was there to deter the Houthis from attacking these vessels, I mean, wouldn't that have been the time to get authorization from Congress? Because presumably, that's what you're set up to do, is to attack anybody who's attacking these vessels.
Yeah, you would think so. I mean, I didn't know what legal strategy the administration is pursuing. I did read something a couple hours ago about the War Powers Resolution of 1973, and the extent to which presidents over time have engaged in a strategy where, you're required to inform Congress within 48 hours of any unilateral action taken by the executive, and then anything that you're doing is limited within a 60-day window. But over time, presidents have found ways to finesse this and report things in such a way that they're constantly extending the 60-day window. And I mean, there are all kinds of, shenanigans that go into the planning and justifying operations like these. But I think you're right that the more fundamental question here is not really about the legalities of the authorization, although that's important, but fundamentally, like, should we be trying to deal with what's going on in Gaza by expanding the conflict, which is what I think these attacks do. Should we sort of play whack-a-mole with anybody who might have anything, who might be in opposition to what's going on in Gaza, or should we try to resolve the situation by pushing for a ceasefire, which I think would be more productive and doesn't risk escalating and broadening the conflict into a wider regional war.
Well, that's what the Houthis are saying. I mean, you don't necessarily need to take them at their word, and we don't need to love Houthis. And I've been saying this, like, I'm not voting for them for class president or whatever, but they've been clear that they're doing this in order to put economic pressure on the United States and Israel, and using like their regional kind of connections near the Red Sea, which is one of the most important shipping lanes in the world, in order to put that kind of pressure on the United States, feels quite straightforward. And perhaps instead of illegally striking Yemen without authorization, maybe Biden could try the ceasefire first and see if the Houthis would cease their blockade and this bombing of these commercial ships, which is what they're saying they would do. Like, maybe try that first before bombing Yemen without authorization.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly makes sense to me. I mean, I don't think it makes sense to frame what's going on, as I think some people are, as kind of, well, this is a kind of chaotic, illogical attack on the Houthis' part, or, an extension of piracy or something like that. There's a very clear strategic objective that is worth taking seriously. And I just don't know that, even from a logical standpoint, set the ethics of what's going on inside, even from a logical geopolitical standpoint, expanding the conflict in this way doesn't seem to me to be the wise course for Biden here.
This is the thing that I find sort of really sort of difficult to parse out, because and I put up this graphic because one of my theories is, and you can't see this this cartoon, but we're going to put up this cartoon. It is military, U.S. military jumping out of paratroopers jumping out of a plane. This is from ages ago. And one paratrooper turns to the other. This is your first re-election campaign, kid, asking a question. And like I'm trying to find the sort of like the rationale here. What the Houthis are doing is very much in their benefit. Apparently, from their perspective, they're having troubles, in terms of like having to govern now, as opposed to be waging this ongoing conflict between, the bombing campaign that had gone on for years from Saudi Arabia with an assist from the United States. And so in terms of strengthening themselves domestically, the U.S. and U.K. and whomever attacking them is a benefit. All of this seems to have been like relatively predictable, as you say. This is not a random thing by the Houthis. And I mean, certainly, like, within the first week of Israel's attacks, response to the attacks on October 7th, we were doing interviews about the expansion of this conflict. And it seems like the Biden administration, it is unclear that there's any price that they aren't willing to pay. And I mean, both in terms of like U.S. foreign policy interests and just crass political cost associated with it in support of Israel's complete unfettered, right to respond and kill as many civilians as they deem necessary or want to kill. I mean, that's what I find so bizarre about this. There is not even like the typical, realpolitik associated with this.
Yeah, it's been really remarkable to watch. And the argument has always been on Biden's part, well, we'll make these public statements, but you should know that behind the scenes we're doing everything we can to sort of encourage Israel to change course. We had that story a couple of days ago, I think, about Israel moving to a different stage of the offensive in Gaza. It's going to be more targeted. But that's all kind of talk. What we see happening right now is the same fundamental conflict I think we've seen since early October. I think we're at 23,000 or so Palestinians who've been killed. The bombings are continuing. On Israel's part, the putative objective of rescuing the hostages has been kind of a joke. I think they've rescued one in offensive action. They've killed several. I think the 100 or so that have been released through negotiations with Hamas, I believe. So there's a lot of what seems like irrationality happening, both in terms of Israel's own justification of what's going on, but also our willingness to back it to the hilt. And I think what's interesting about that meme that you mentioned, I have seen that cartoon before, is that it was, it's from ages ago. And I think maybe back to the early Iraq days or something, where I think the standard line in American politics when it came to foreign conflict was, well, when presidents really are having trouble domestically, when they need people to rally around them, they might engage in some kind of foreign adventure that'll rally, the flag, create this kind of rally around the flag effect. I don't think we're in that same political world anymore. I think that Americans are very, very wary of international conflict generally, Middle Eastern conflict, specifically after Iraq. And I don't think that, any of this has been helped Biden at all since October. I think that he's losing key constituencies within the Democratic Party base. We'll see if they come back over the course of the year as that we move into a general election. But all of this has been tremendously politically costly because I think we're in an environment now where Americans are so weary and tired of resources being expended to no real purpose in the Middle East. And in ways that actually probably make us less safe. I think that's the fundamental reality of this. And if Biden can't see that, he's blind. It's really mystifying to watch, as you say. I can't really make sense of it.
I think I agree. I think like the extension of Biden's sort of like 1993 politics seems to be operative here. I think Bill Clinton, his first sort of military attack, I think was on Iraq, if I'm not mistaken, in like maybe a year out from his first reelection. I think maybe it was earlier, maybe it was halfway through his first administration. But there is definitely a sense of because the other thing that Biden is risking here, it seems to me, and I think you're absolutely right. And again, this is sort of the crass political talk of this. Obviously, this is. The morality of this, I think, is pretty clear to me. But or I should say, the immorality. But from just a political calculation, the other aspect of this is that if you look at the charts of like the cost of shipping containers has shot up through the roof in the past 2 weeks, and this is like at a time where the inflation numbers, and I think you tweeted this out the other day, the inflation is still weighing incredibly heavily on the American public. And the idea that you're going to trade Israel's ability to sort of like ceaselessly kill civilians for inflation, for use of military, a widening conflict, for undermining your own sort of like a political coalition. It is beyond baffling. And usually in these instances, it's just like incompetence I mean, I think they really don't understand how this era is fundamentally different, at least in terms of like people under the age of 40, it seems to me.
Right. Right. Which is a lot of people. I mean, it's not just, young lefty people like me. It's just like, I think the American public in general has changed. And I wonder about the extent to which Biden can perceive that. But I also think part of what's happening here is that Biden really does himself, as an individual, have a real history of being very, very pro-Israel. I think it's part of who he thinks he is as a politician. I think that backing Israel is something he thinks is sort of fundamentally important to him. I think Frank Thor's book got at this a little bit, The Last Politician. He talks about the extent to which, since the 1970s, Biden has adopted this as a core part of his political brand. A lot of things have changed about Joe Biden. As repealed of the change in record, that has not fundamentally changed in any way. And so that might be part of what's going on here too. It's hard to understand otherwise, for the reasons you're talking about. It's a matter of pure political self-preservation, why he'd be so committed to the course that he's on, without any real sign that he's thinking about changing very much.
And it also undercuts almost like the primary narrative of his reelection campaign, which is that Donald Trump represents an existential threat to the United States, project, as it were. And it seems like Biden is willing. I mean, it has like a sort of like a double impact, right? Because it's demoralizing for people who even accept that premise, because Biden is fundamentally undercutting that project with his sort of, like you say, I think it is. I mean, it's even, I don't even know if you can call it ideological. It's in terms of, it is so strident.
Trump's bragging today about how he's saying that, they used to say I would cause World War III. Now look at Biden. If I come into office, we're going to end all the wars. And like, obviously that's a silly thing for him to say. This is the guy that struck Soleimani, and I have no faith that he would be any better than Biden on this. But he sees it politically as an opportunity for him to differentiate himself. And to Sam's point, like Biden, his proposition is, I'm the stabilizing candidate. I'm going to bring us back to a moment of peace, of stability, and I'm the empathy candidate. And in his support of Israel's campaign of mass killing in Gaza, that is a complete differential. That's not compatible with that framing.
No, I think that's right, and it's just going to drag on and on and on. And politically, the best thing for Biden would be a ceasefire. I mean, imagine that, like being the president who managed to end a conflict rather than somebody who sort of fuels the flames and has it drag on. I think it seems like for the next several months. I don't know what Israel's objectives are. There were these stories, even in the Wall Street Journal from a few months ago, about how American officials behind the scenes were troubled by the extent to which there was no plan. There just wasn't any kind of sense of, even if you were managed to root out Hamas and what you're imagining is going to happen, what is the post Hamas Gaza look like? How do you stabilize things? Who's the authority there? There was never a plan. And so this thing is going to continue being a ball of chaos for the foreseeable future. And I do think that the best thing, even politically for Biden, will be to wind things down and to make it look like he's brought stability to the situation rather than exacerbated it. Right now, I think he looks ineffectual. He's backing a war that doesn't seem to be achieving any of its, ostensible objectives. Thousands and thousands of people are being killed. We're seeing all these images of children without limbs. We now have this trial going on in South Africa, brings genocide charges against Israel before the international community. None of this looks good. None of this seems like it's building up Biden's image of this, as you say, like this statesman who's going to bring order and stability to the world stage. It all seems like things are kind of flaming out of control in ways that I don't know. Biden doesn't seem responsive to and doesn't seem to really care enough to stop.
I want to get to that trial in The Hague in just a second, but what happens if the Houthis, who again, they've been subject to bombing campaigns by the Saudis for literally nearly a decade.
Yep.
So it seems to me that if there's anybody, any group in the world at this point that you're not going to deter from their agenda by aerial bombardment, it would be the Houthis at this point, right? And so what happens when they don't stop? Like what happens? Because either this coalition begins to sort of ramp up what they're doing, or they end up looking like they're ineffectual, and this coalition of 20, U.S. allies is essentially rendered ineffectual by the Houthis. I mean, what happens in this instance?
Well, who knows? I mean, I think you could say the same thing about Hamas itself, honestly. I mean, like, if we haven't learned the lesson that you cannot bomb these people into compliance, these kind of non-state or kind of non-traditional adversaries who have like real deep-seated grievances against the West, against American power. Like, if we haven't learned that you can't bomb your way to a solution in Middle Eastern conflict, I don't know when we're going to learn it. I don't think that at the end of this thing, people in Gaza are going to be more positively disposed to the Israeli state and less into Hamas at the end of this, partially because they've been so brutalized with what's going on. Similarly, the Houthis, as you said, have demonstrated a real resolve over years and years and years of very intense bombing backed by the West. I don't know when we're going to learn the lesson that these groups are to be, the conventional conflict is never going to be the solution here, and I'm not a foreign policy expert, I'm not a geopolitical expert, I'm not going to sit here and tell you what the alternatives are, but it should be clear to us that this is not going to work.
Right.
And it's worth pursuing other avenues for bringing things to settlement.
Let's turn to that the case at The Hague right now. South Africa has brought charges of genocide, and this, just to be clear with people, that this is sort of almost like a preliminary injunction part of this case, where South Africa is suggesting that there is enough indication that Israel is pursuing genocide, that the ICJ should rule that it is in favor of Israel stopping, essentially. Right. But here is South African lawyer Ronald Lamola in basically presenting Israeli statements as proof of the genocidal intent of the Israeli government, and pointing to that sort of the way that Netanyahu's referencing Amalek from the Bible as an indication of sort of how this information is flowing through, because of course no government says our intent is genocide, at least not these days. And here is Lamola.
Command of the state, they communicated state policy. It is simple. If the statements were not intended, they would not have been made. The genocidal intent behind these statements is not ambiguous to the Israeli soldiers on the ground. Indeed, it is directing their actions and objectives. On 7 December 2023, Israeli soldiers proved that they understood the Prime Minister's message to remember what the Amalek has done to you as genocidal. They were recorded by journalists dancing and singing. We know our motto, there are no uninvolved, that they obey one commandment, to wipe off the seed of Amalek. The Prime Minister's invocation of Amalek is being used by soldiers to justify the killing of civilians, including children. These are the soldiers repeating the inciting words of their Prime Minister.
I'll read these. It's being sung in Hebrew. I'm coming to occupy Gaza and beat Hezbollah. I stick by one mitzvah, to wipe off the seed of Amalek. I left home behind me. Won't come back until victory. We know our slogan. There are no uninvolved civilians. I mean, that's pretty compelling argument that Netanyahu says, cites their duty relative to the biblical sort of story of Amalek, and Israeli soldiers are, and not every Israeli soldier obviously caught on video, but certainly these Israeli soldiers both repeat the citation of Amalek, which is where you must annihilate all of their seed, and literally saying it's our slogan. Like, we know our mantra. There are no uninvolved civilians. And yet, when we watch CNN, we'll see spokesperson after spokesperson says no one takes the care with civilians like we do.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's all incredibly perverse. Honestly, in the very early weeks of the conflict back in October, I see statements from Israeli officials or people in Israeli society, saying things like, oh, there are no innocent civilians, they need to be punished to a point where they don't want to back Hamas anymore, and that will involve curbing their resources and denying them food and all these kinds of things. Like, I initially assumed a lot of those were like mistranslations. Like, surely they were not being that explicit about the language and logic of collective punishment. But they weren't, I mean, we've heard over and over and over again now, these overt statements, blaming everybody in Gaza for what happened on October 7th, suggesting that because of an election years and years and years ago, a Palestinian election years and years and years ago, that Hamas won. Well, that sort of means that Hamas has enjoyed the support for all of the actions they've undertaken since then by the entirety of the Palestinian community. We see all these efforts to sort of to collapse and erase the distinction between an innocent civilian and the combatants, that I think point to real eliminationist intent here. And I think a lot of the Israeli cases rested on the idea of the Holocaust being definitional, in that a genocide is when you are actively trying to eliminate every single person who belongs to an ethnic group or religious group, as was the case in the Holocaust. And that's not necessarily, what genocides mean. All that you have to do to demonstrate genocide, as far as I understand it, is not of international law, is that you are targeting a group of people on the basis of their identity with elimination intent. Even if you don't actually succeed or try to eliminate all of them, you are basically denying their humanity, and engage in a concentrated attack on their community. And I don't think that there is a way to read what we're seeing right now happening in Gaza as being anything but that. Especially, as we're hearing more and more about this idea of shoving everybody over the border into Egypt, this idea that Gaza will only be stabilized with a kind of mass removal of the population. We're hearing, I think, IDF soldiers and other people in Israeli society talking about resettling the area. This is all. It doesn't really get more.
It's textbook.
Blatant,
it's textbook. Yeah,
it's pretty straightforward.
Germany has joined as a third party in South Africa's case against Israel to defend Israel. To your point about obviously the deep generational wounds of the Holocaust here, the idea that Germany feels that it's appropriate in any way for them to weigh in at all. I mean, honestly, they should be recusing themselves in this instance, but they are coming to the defense of Israel here in a fairly unprecedented way. Everything you're saying, paired also with Netanyahu kind of scrambling and making a speech in English the day before the proceedings began to say that they have no intention of permanently occupying Gaza and ethnically cleansing Palestinians. I mean, I don't know if they're the fact that they're even engaging in the defense when they previously boycotted these kinds of proceedings for decades indicates to me that they might be a little bit worried.
Yeah, as they should be. I mean, this has been a tremendous disaster for Israel's image. I think that all of the tumult in American politics right now is a real shift. The idea that you cannot expect defense from every portion of American society for whatever Israel does from here on out is, I think, a tremendous change. As much as the administration is trying to hold the old alliance together, I think that more and more Americans are really disturbed by what they're seeing, and I think that the trial is only going to deepen that as it continues. I don't think we're going to expect a real ruling on this for possibly for many years, but if in these preliminary proceedings, the fact that we've been having them in the first place and entertaining this question, I think, is going to be a real blow to the Israeli image, and I think it'll probably have a lasting effect, and hopefully it'll apply more pressure and be more of an inducement to wind things down in Gaza.
Yeah. Lastly, I want to play this one clip too. The sort of like knock-on damage that this is doing to the Biden administration credibility, to U.S. credibility. I mean, and I'm not talking about mine personally, credibility with me. I'm talking like even in sort of like broader, sort of more diplomatic circles. It really seems like farcical and just bizarre at this point. This is John Kirby having to answer the question. And what's fascinating about this is there's no refutation. This is simply just sort of like almost like a category question. He is asked by, and do we know the name of this reporter? He's asked by a reporter, we'll get her name in just a moment, whether cutting off Palestinians' access to water and food is in and of itself a war crime. And this is Kirby's response.
As you know, you dismissed a few days ago the case that brought by South Africa against Israel at the ICJ. Did you read the indictment? And if you did, do you believe that cutting off water, electricity, and fuel on a civilian population does not constitute a war crime by itself, nothing else?
Yes, I read the indictment, and as I said, and we stand by what we said about this. We find it without merit. We find it counterproductive, and I'll leave it there.
I mean, so he can't even answer that fundamental question. That seems to be really problematic. If the U.S. government now is incapable of even answering that question as a general manner.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a good position to be in. I saw somebody writing, I think it was earlier today, this argument that, Israel might be committing war crimes, but war crimes are not necessarily genocide. And to me, if that's the argument you're having, if that's where the debate is, you're basically lost. Yeah. I mean, there's no, that's not where you want to be, and that's not where we want to be as a country. Having split hairs in that particular way, it should be clear. And I think it is clear to most people that at the very, very, very least, the Palestinian people in Gaza are being put through something without recent precedent in modern warfare, both in terms of the intensity of the bombing, in terms of the indiscriminate nature of it, how packed in they are. I mean, it was clear at the very outset when we think about the density of Gaza and the 2 million people who live there. I think half of them are children. That this was going to be something horrific. And indefensible, and something that was not going to be, conducive to establishing a lasting peace in the region and addressing the root causes of what happened on October 7th. Everybody knew that. And what we've gone through, as we've watched it happen in the last couple of months, are these different stages of denial and petulance on the part of the administration. And Kirby in particular, I think, has been very kind of dismissive and haughty about all of this in his statements. I don't know if he's well suited to being a spokesperson anywhere. But if all the administration can do and all Israel can do is deny or reject the premise of these questions without attending to the realities of what's going on the ground, without attending to the realities of what the Israeli officials have said, it's a real shame, and I think it ultimately does hurt the administration in a narrow political sense that I don't think they fully appreciate.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It is really. I think there's just an amazing amount of hubris, but also incompetence and bizarre ideology. I think that's driving this thing. And that is, I find, even from the most cynical of lenses, to be sort of shocking. Osita Nwanevu, thanks so much for your time today. We will put links to your. Well, actually, the best place for you is OsitaNwanevu.com because you can see all of your writing. You send people to your Guardian and New Republic pieces, so we will link to that. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.